And again, welcome back to Westminster. The Prime Minister has told the House that she does not have enough support to put a third meaningful vote to Parliament as yet. She's still on her feet as we speak. There we go. MPs also to debate and vote on a number of amendments that could mean they take control of the Brexit process. So let's bring in Sonia Soda, who is the chief leader writer at The Observer, and Tom Harwood from Guido Fawkes. Hello to you both. He does that a bit and then he goes away again. It's fine. We'll be able to hear each other in just a second or two. She has until the end of the week to get a third meaningful vote through. The way things are looking, likelihood?
She's pretty much said it herself that she doesn't have the support she needs this week. It doesn't look like the DUP are going to come on board. If the DUP don't come on board, it looks incredibly unlikely that she'll take enough MPs from her party with her. So the big question really is, if the deal doesn't go through this week, she might not even put it to a vote, we're hearing today, then what happens? And there's some really conflicting messages coming from the Prime Minister. She seems to have ruled out no deal. She says, you know, that won't happen because Parliament said that it shouldn't. But really the only way of ensuring that no deal doesn't happen is either the deal going through or asking for a long extension or perhaps even revoking Article 50. But she's also said, you know, she's going to leave it to Parliament perhaps to see if they can come up with an alternative plan. But if that alternative plan isn't consistent with what's in party manifestos, she might just ignore it, which I think would actually land us in a bit of a constitutional crisis. If Parliament were to get behind something like customs union membership and then Theresa May says, sorry guys, I'm just not doing that, it wasn't in the Conservative Party manifesto, you've got Parliament telling the Prime Minister to do something and the Prime Minister refusing to do it, I think that does take us into constitutional crisis territory.
We're already in constitutional crisis territory. It's an utterly miserable situation for everyone involved, and I do not envy for a second the decision that Brexiteer MPs have to make. It seems like they're absolutely up against a barrel, and in many ways the only way to get even a scintilla of a clean Brexit might be to pass Theresa May's horrible deal. And what we've seen is that over the last few weeks, a few more Brexiteers are inching towards that place. Actually, Ian Duncan-Smith over the weekend, one of the people who's been most ardent in terms of his opposition to her deal, signalled that if this is the only way to get Brexit through, this might be what he would be considering to vote for. But ultimately, there are no good choices here. MPs are up against a barrel from all sides, but one thing that I would note is that the Labour opposition to the deal is quite perplexing, really. The reason why Brexiteers oppose Theresa May's deal is that it contains a potentially permanent customs union within the backstop. It has quite a close relationship to the single market. Those are the two things that Labour say they want to achieve in their deal. They're sitting there in Theresa May's deal, yet the Labour Party is opposing it for no reason that I could work out.
I mean, it is an argument. It's a school of thought that, train of thought that, you know, it is the best deal that we can get. But because it's Theresa May, because it's a Conservative leader's deal, the Labour Party are not supporting it.
Well, what Labour has said, I think, is that they're unhappy with the political declaration, which is the statement that sets out the future relationship between the UK and the European Union. And what the Labour Party want to go in there would be something that talks about a much softer, closer relationship between the EU and the UK. Now, Theresa May apparently made an offer to Jeremy Corbyn today. She said, well, why don't we separate the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration? And perhaps let's just all get behind the withdrawal agreement. But that was a trap for Labour, and I think Jeremy Corbyn was right to resist that, because the whole point is you can't really vote for the withdrawal agreement by itself without, you know, I think it's terrible that we don't know what's coming next. A political declaration at least creates a bit of mood music about what's coming next. But if Labour were to just back the withdrawal agreement and then there were a change of Prime Minister, and who knows, could be Jacob Rees-Mogg, could be Boris Johnson, could be a really hard Brexiteer, potentially, then actually Labour have got no way of holding the next Prime Minister to any promises about what might come next. So I think it was very sensible of Labour to be opposing this deal.
Well, the political declaration is totally non-binding. You're right, it does set the mood music. It's very concerning mood music for Brexiteers. It has a line in it about creating, building on a single customs territory. That sounds a lot to a lot of Brexiteers like a customs union, something that the Brexiteers oppose and the Labour Party supports. But similarly, I don't think there's a risk of a Prime Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg down the line. Unlike the Labour Party, the Conservative Party has a slightly more sensible way of electing its leader that only puts out two candidates to the membership. So unless they can get a third plus one, one of the MPs backing a leadership candidate, they won't go through to the membership.
But I think it's without doubt that there will be a hard Brexiteer. Like, I think MPs within the Tory party, they get to pick the 2 candidates that go out to the membership. And I think actually it would be very foolish at this stage to rule it out and say there's no chance that somebody like Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg could end up on that. In fact, I think someone like Dominic Raab, Boris Johnson, someone who stands really for the hard Eurosceptic flank of the Conservative Party, absolutely would be on that ballot paper. And then when it goes out to members, we know that the Conservative Party membership is much more Eurosceptic than the country at large. So I would say that candidate probably has a very good chance of being elected.
It would be extraordinary, wouldn't it, if a country that voted leave actually had a Prime Minister who voted leave? Wouldn't that be a turn up for the books? I think that really many people in the country, especially the majority of the country that voted leave, find it extraordinary that for the last 3 years we've been led through this process entirely by people who voted Remain. People who voted leave have been put in fig leaf positions.
That's actually true.
People who voted leave who've been put in fig leaf...
So two Brexit secretaries who voted leave walked away because they figured out, oh, this is a bit too difficult for us.
No.
We have to wash our hands of it. So I think that is quite an assertion from you.
They walked away because the agreements were being negotiated behind their backs.
It was their job to negotiate it, and they decided they couldn't do it.
Ollie Robbins was moved from DexEU to number 10.
And they're shouting outside, nobody can hear what you're saying.
Ollie Robbins was moved from DexEU to number 10, where he started working very closely with the Prime Minister, doing the negotiation behind the back of David Davis, the so-called Brexit Secretary. In many ways, the Brexit Secretary wasn't doing any of the negotiation whatsoever. No wonder they resigned. People who voted leave have not been in the driving seat for any of this process, and that's why people who voted leave are so upset with the way it's been driven by people who voted Remain. It's a national travesty that what happened after the referendum was in many ways Brexit was stolen from the Brexiteers by so many vested interests, and Brexiteers have a right to be angry about that.
I'm afraid that just sounds like whinging for me. Like, Theresa May made 2 people who voted for leave Brexit secretaries in succession, and they weren't able... They realised how much more tricky Brexit was than when they were campaigning during the referendum.
Or, potentially, she wouldn't allow them to do their jobs, and she was in charge at number 10.
I don't think that that's what happened. I think if you're committed to something, you've really got to give it your best shot, and I think they walked away far too early. So I think this idea that there's some kind of agenda against leave within the heart of government just isn't quite right. I think what Theresa May's deal shows is that there are some really difficult trade-offs involved in leaving the European Union that people who wanted us to leave weren't quite upfront about during the referendum campaign, and that's what's all come to pass in this deal. And I think people on the hard right of her party sort of look at the deal and say, these trade-offs, we shouldn't have to choose between them. They don't exist. And actually they do. It's the reality, and they're not able to grapple with reality.
There's an alternative deal out there. It's called Plan A+. It was proposed by both the Brexit secretaries who you say have resigned after they left DexEU. They have been backing it, and number 10 has refused to cancel it. Plan A+ is a potential agreement based on mutual recognition of standards between the UK and the EU. It's been written by senior trade lawyers who have had meetings and conversations with people in the EU. It's something that most Brexiteers back, but it's something that the government has refused to countenance. And it's because the people at the top of this government, from the very beginning, have viewed this whole exercise as damage limitation. They've thought about ways to keep us closely tied to the EU so that we won't have too much of a change, too much of a rupture. Well, actually, people voted for a change. People voted to do things differently. And yes, people voted for a big step to be taken. And if we're going to do this shuffling, you can't turn around an oil tanker in that way. You can't do little moves. You can't keep us chained to the block that you're trying to extricate yourself from. Really, what we need to do in order to make a success of Brexit is realise it has to be a big, bold change. And Theresa May isn't a big or bold politician.
I mean, there wasn't a particular form of leave on the ballot paper in the referendum. People didn't vote, for example, to leave the customs union. There was a narrow majority in favour of leaving the EU. Actually, a soft Brexit entirely respects the mandate of that referendum. And I think Tom is making a huge number of assumptions about why people went to vote and put their cross where they did. And actually, I think we'd do a lot better in this country to talk to people to find out why they voted leave. For example, I think if we were to leave the European European Union under the terms of the withdrawal agreement. It shouldn't be up to the next Prime Minister to determine the future of the relationship. We should have a citizens' assembly where normal people come together and they can really talk about what they want to see. And I think Tom would be quite surprised, because there was a citizens' assembly back in 2017 on Brexit. It had more leavers and remainers in it, and actually people were much happier with the idea of a soft Brexit than a no-deal Brexit.
So we've seen poll after poll over the last few months, and actually Leaver opinion is hardening around the idea of a harder Brexit.
There's still no majority for it in the country. Still no majority for it.
There's more people who favour a clean WTO break with the EU than who favour a second referendum. That opinion isn't reflected in that building over there, and it's to our detriment as a country, really. It's to our detriment within negotiations, and it's to our detriment within our political culture more generally. These conversations that we're having, that building is so out of touch with the vast majority of people in this country.
Got to leave it there. But thank you for joining us. We're going to be here all week. Try the veal. Come and see us again later on in the week.
Will do.
Still to come on the programme for you. More turmoil for the Prime Minister as MPs try to take control of the Brexit process. That to come.